What's cracking, everybody? Benji Bruce here, Speaking Lifestyle. We're going to get going for today. Today is going to be really simple, really short, really sweet. All right. So today I'm just going to talk about what's the best way to end a presentation. This was a question that was asked during a live session, and I figured hey, let's do a whole live session just on this thing. But as I was writing this, I thought to myself, the ending is actually very dependent on the beginning. So now I almost feel like I got to create a whole new live just because I was creating this live. So we're going to talk about literally how do you end a presentation, the best way to end it. And ultimately the answer is really there's no one best way to end a presentation. So let's see who's hopping on, if this thing will load at all. All right, there we go. I think it's going for a second. There we go. All right, so I'm going to see who's hopping on. If you guys have any questions, make sure you ask the questions. So like I said, all we're going to do is just talk about how do you end a presentation, the best way to end a presentation. And once again, this is going to be really short, really sweet. What's up, Richard? What's up, Maggie? What's up, GS? What's up, Peeps, Kareem, all the other people, Denise, Paul? What's up, people? So like I said earlier, when it comes to ending a presentation, this is the question that was asked like a week ago on one of the Facebook Lives, what's the best way to end a presentation? And when you are creating your presentation, obviously the ending matters, but the ending is very, very dependent on the beginning. The ending depends on everything else that comes before you finish at the end. And so ultimately, what you do is you start with the end in mind. This is why I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, what's the best way to end a presentation? It depends. That's ultimately what it is. It depends on what presentation you're giving. So if you're trying to close from the stage, you're a platform seller, you're selling a program on stage, it's going to be very different than if you're a motivational speaker, or if you're just creating a video, you're just filming a video, you on the phone or something, or you're just filming or you're recording a podcast, or sales video or webinar. Everything depends on the context. Context influences everything in a presentation. And this is something that maybe I'll create a whole new live just on this thing. I realized this a long time ago when I was just doing entertainment. As an entertainer, it's there's walk around entertainment and then there's stage. And so I was doing walk around mentalism. I go in a restaurant or just get hired at a cocktail party. You walk around to people. They're up close and personal. You're performing for them. And versus the stage, obviously you're on a stage. There's the crowd, 500 people or whatever in a award banquet type room. And the context, the environment changes how people react. And so in a close-up environment, people are much more willing to interrupt you. They're much more willing to play around and all that sort of stuff. But on a stage, it's very different. They step on a stage with you and they do damn near everything you say. You could be touch your finger to your nose and jump up and down. They'll do it. Everyone does everything you say when they're on a stage. And so the context influences everything. And this is why if you want to focus on, what's the best way to end a presentation? It really depends on what presentation you're given to begin with. And so that's the first thing you want to think about. And by the way, if you have any questions, make sure you ask them now, because this isn't going to be a long live. So once I'm done with this, we're going to be good to go. What's up, Kathy? So ultimately, like I said, you got to first determine what's the presentation you want to give. The ending is very dependent on the beginning. That's the biggest thing that you have to remember. Don't see the ending as separate from the entire presentation. If you think of the ending as something different from everything else, then you're going to focus too much on the wrong thing. So that's why you have to remember the ending is dependent on the entire presentation. You have to think what leads up to the ending. That's how you have a great ending. It's not, let me just focus on the close, or let's say you're a platform seller. You're let me just focus on how I position this offer and all that sort of stuff. If you create a really great offer and you start doing what they do on stage, it's normally $3,000, but if you get it today, it's only $30. If you do that on stage and you focus on the ending, but you didn't actually focus on what came before that, then it doesn't matter what you did at the end, it's always going to fail. And so that's why the ending is really dependent on the beginning. And this is why I tell people, think about it when it comes to dating. If a guy were to go up to a girl and he starts talking with the girl and he says what's your phone number? And she goes, I got a boyfriend. She comes up with the excuse, I got a boyfriend, right? And so what happened? Was the problem at the moment when he asked for the number? Not at all. The problem is never at the moment. It's never at the end when he asks for the number. The problem is the entire conversation that happened before that. And so the same goes with your presentation. The problem is never really at the end. It's everything that happens before that. That's where you got to spend so much of your time. So ultimately, the audience has to be invested in you in order for the ending to matter. That's what you really have to really think about. Think about it when it comes, or think about like movies. So movies, if you look at the climax in a movie, in a story, the climax is always like towards the end. It's always a very short thing. It's like you got a 2-hour movie. The actual climax is like 20 minutes, if that, maybe 15 minutes or something. And the only way people care about that climax is because of everything that happened before, the character and the story, everything that was happening before that moment in time. Before the moment was like, bam, it was like the explosion moment. And so you have to think in terms of your presentation is very similar to a movie in that sense. And that's why like you have to focus on your charisma and you in general, because once again, with a movie, the great movies, it has nothing to do with the plot, like absolutely nothing. A great movie comes down to great characters. And once again, the same with your presentation. The presentation has nothing to do with what it is you're actually saying. It really comes down to you. It's more like how you say it in your charisma. That's really what it comes down to. You can literally take two people, give them the exact same presentation, word for word, and I'm telling you, one guy, he'll be great. The other person, he'll suck. And so it really, really does come down to you. You got to think of this as like very similar to how movies are created. So once again, let's go back. You're thinking about the ending. Start with the beginning. Start with what exactly do I want people to do? And so this depends on, are you creating a sales video, webinar, platform closing, motivational presentation, podcast? What exactly are you doing? So let's say you're doing a sales video, webinar, same thing, and platform closing. They're all very similar. So with that, all you're really thinking about is just the call to action. Like that's what you're thinking about when it comes to the ending. And more importantly, you're thinking about the objections that people are having, and you're crushing those objections throughout your entire presentation. Your entire presentation is objection crushing. You're basically bringing up an idea, you're bringing up an objection that they would normally have, you bring it up and then you crush it with whatever your brilliant response is. And so you would do that in a sales video, in a webinar, in a platform, on the platform when you're selling a program, but you would not do that in a motivational speech. It wouldn't make sense. I mean, what objections do people have? You're not selling anything from the stage. You're just kind of sharing a message, really. So this is why you sit there and you think, all right, if I'm selling from the stage, if I'm doing a sales video, I obviously want people to buy. And even then, you got to think, if you are selling from the stage and you're doing a webinar, the way you get people to buy is going to be very different. So if you're going to get people to buy when you're selling from the stage, you got to think, how do I get people to actually stand up and actually go to the back of the room and actually buy the damn thing? And so at this point, you're doing little things like when one person stands up, you acknowledge it. You're like, yeah, see that person there? They took action. Like, you acknowledge it. You don't just let them stand up and go to the back of the room. You acknowledge it. That way everybody in the room sees them. Oh, this person's taking action. Hopefully they didn't just stand up, just go use a restroom. So, but you got to think in terms of the actual context before you start thinking about the ending of the presentation. And then, like, for example, this is why you see on webinars where they have that fake thing that pops up. So-and-so bought just now. So-and-so bought just now. So-and-so bought as well. So-and-so bought as well. That's why they have that, because it's very similar to the platform closing when someone stands up or a couple people stand up and you point them out like, oh, see, that person took action. That person took action. They know what's up. And so it's very similar to that. Unfortunately, with a webinar, a lot of people know it's fake nowadays. So that's what you're thinking. You're thinking in terms of like, what exactly am I trying to accomplish? If you're doing a podcast or like a YouTube video, a lot of times all you're really doing is just sharing your message. That's really all you're doing at that point with the podcast or YouTube video. If you are selling something, then once again, you're thinking in terms of, how do I reverse engineer in terms of getting them to do what it is you need them to do, if you need them to buy and all that sort of stuff. But if you're creating a podcast or just a simple YouTube video, all you really do at the end is you kind of reiterate your main idea. So You're sitting there, when you create a presentation, especially for a podcast or a YouTube video, it's best to start with just one main idea. Well, start and end with one main idea. And then at the end of that, you simply reiterate it. And throughout it, you also need to reiterate it as well, because once again, people always forget what you say. And so that's why you just say, here's my one main idea. Remember the TED Talk, the why, Simon Sinek, know your why or find your why or whatever the why is thing. It was just one point. Like, he didn't go on and say, know your why and know your how and know your what and know your shoulds. He didn't say that. He's just like, know your why. Like, you have to have a why. And that's what people remember. I mean, it's like one of the most memorable TED Talks of all time, because he had one main point. He was on stage. He wasn't trying to get, he wasn't trying to sell anything. He's just literally trying to share a message. So at the end, he just reiterated the idea. That's all he was really doing. It's really important that when you are sharing your message, all you truly need to communicate is that it's not that you're really trying to persuade people. It's more along the lines of, they just need to believe that you believe in what you're saying. That's what people need to believe. When you are sharing your message in a podcast, video, on stage, whatever it is, all that you really have to communicate is that people believe that you believe in what you're saying. Because if you try to sell people on things like that, you'll come across as like pushy and all that. People are just going to say like, oh, absolutely not. But if they believe like in your certainty, you're on the stage or you're in a podcast or whatever, they believe in your certainty, then at that point they're like, okay, got it. I understand. Even if people disagree with Simon Sinek with his why thing, they still understand that he believes in that thing. Like, they still get it. And they're like, okay, yeah, great presentation. And so that's what really has to happen. Now let me, before I'm done here, like I said, it's going to be really quick. Before I'm done, I'm going to share with you my simple standing ovation formula. Anyone who's ever seen me on a stage, they will tell you I got a standing ovation. Why? Because 100% of the time I've gotten a standing ovation. Guaranteed. Anyone who, at least to this point, so I'm 31 at this point. It is, Wednesday the 3rd, April the 3rd, 2019. I've literally never not gotten a standing ovation. And it's because I've done this every single time. And so, and by the way, guys, you said the audio in your broadcast is great. Cool. All right. So, and by the way, guys, if you have any questions, make sure you ask the questions now, because after I'm done with this, we're going to be done. So here's a standing ovation formula. So ultimately, remember, everything depends on what you do in the beginning. So in the beginning, if your presentation isn't right, if it's not good in the beginning, even if you do what I'm about to tell you, it just won't matter. Like, it won't matter. So here's what I learned with the standing ovation. My routine, in fact, you can actually go to YouTube, type in Benji Bruce Inspirational, and then you'll see the video. It combines mind reading with a motivational slam poem. And so what happens is, in the beginning, it's like you're building up, just like in a movie. You're kind of building up to this climax. So I'm doing all these things, I'm saying all these things in the beginning, and I'm building up to this final moment, this final routine of mine with this slam motivation poetry thing. I'm building up to this final moment. As soon as I'm almost finished and I'm ready to do this thing, I literally say, all right, thank you guys. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you inviting me out. I know I'm great. No, I don't say that. I'm like, thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me here. This is going to be the last thing I'm going to do. And so I tell them, like, I've got one more thing I want to show you. This is going to be the last thing I'm going to do. The reason I do this is because I want them to know that this is the end. Like, we're coming to an end. I want them to know that. It's kind of like cueing them, like, hey, if you like me, maybe you could stand up a little bit. So it's kind of cueing them in a way to kind of say, like, hey, we're coming to an end. Because like, sometimes when you see a presentation and you're wondering, like, oh, is it time to clap? And then sometimes you'll clap too early. And like, that. So basically what I do is I tell everyone, like, yes, be prepared to clap. That's kind of what I'm saying without saying it. So that's step number one. You kind of tell them. Step number two, this isn't really a step. This is more of just the actual finishing routine or story or whatever message that you're going to deliver. What I've come to realize that you need to have either one of two things. It needs to be either high energy or very, very emotional. It has to be one of those two. Like high energy or very, very emotional to the point where people are damn near in tears. I saw a guy, I don't remember his name, a black dude. He works with or used to work with Tony Robbins. I know you worked with Tony Robbins, but he was like one of the only guys that Tony Robbins allowed to be on a stage. And when I heard this and I saw his presentation, I was like, oh, okay, I can see why. And like the dude had people in tears. Like he did this thing. He's like, everyone close your eyes. I want you to visualize this child back in the day. And like he had everyone like visualize this thing. I could literally hear sniffles, like people were in tears. Like it was so emotional in terms of what he was doing. And so you have to, the finishing touch has to be either very, very emotional or it has to be very, very high energy. I went the high energy route with the actual routine, as you guys see if you go to YouTube and look it up. So like literally when I say high energy, I'm practically yelling. Like even the video that you're going to see on YouTube, if you watch it, I've even increased my energy from that point. Like literally I'm practically yelling, into the mic, like, I'm like all yelling and stuff. And so it has to be one of those. So number one, you say, all right, thanks everybody. I really appreciate being here. This is going to be the final thing I'm going to do. Then the routine has to be high energy or very emotional. You do the routine or tell the story, whatever it is. People are crying or they're like, oh my goodness, like they feel the energy in the room. And it's kind of like the energy, you built it all up, or like they're crying or whatever. You built it all up. Then you're like, bam, you finish. When you finish, here's what you do. He's like, bam, boom, done. Thank you. And then you go, thank you. And here's what you do with your hands. So let me make sure my hands are in view. Okay. So here's what you do with your hands. You say, thank you. Let me move this out the way a little bit. So you know how most people, when they bow, they're just like this. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You don't bow like that. The way you bow is like this. Just like that. Like notice how my hands, they went up a little bit. It's like, thank you. And it goes up, kind of telling people stand up. That's kind of what I'm doing, and without saying it. It's kind of like stand up. And so it's literally like this. Like, thank you. And like that's literally what I'm doing. So you bow and you raise your hands a little bit. And what happens is one person is going to stand. At least one person is going to stand. Whoever stands, usually it's not just one person. Usually it actually is like a table or something, like it's actually more than one person. But when anyone stands up, here's what you do the second they stand up. You point to that person. You say, thank you. You point directly to that person. Thank you. And you do it again. Thank you. And I'm telling you, every single time it works, because what you're doing when you point to that person, you're bringing attention to them. They're the person who stood up. You're saying thank you. Like you're literally thanking that person, not the audience. You're saying thank you. Because you're telling everyone, you're basically saying like, everybody stand up like this dude. I'm thinking this, you're rewarding good behavior, punishing bad behavior. You know, Pavlov's dog. So it's like, thank you. And it's like, thanks. And you do that again. And so that's really what you're doing, in terms of the standing ovation thing. It's subtle, but it works every single time as long as the finishing touch is emotional and or high energy. It has to be one of those. If it's not one of those, then it's harder to get a standing ovation. And the standing ovation, you only want this when you're doing a motivational speech, by the way. If you are closing from the platform, no way in hell do you want to do this. You don't want to do something like this. You want people to go to the back of the room and buy your damn product. And so this is why you only want to do this if you're doing a motivational keynote presentation. That's what you want to do. It's really simple, but it's effective as all hell. So I'm going to see if there are any questions. If there aren't any, then we are good to go. Ultimately, like I said, there is no best way to actually end a presentation. It all depends on what the presentation is and what you want them to do. And then based on what it is you want them to do, that's when you reverse engineer everything. The standing ovation, I know a lot of speakers are like, I don't really need a standing ovation and it's not for my ego and I don't really need it's not my ego and all that. Let me tell you something. A standing ovation is not for you. A standing ovation is for the person who hired you because it gives them direct feedback onto what the audience thinks of you. And so instead of the person who hired you, instead of them having to ask people, what'd you think? What'd you think? Instead of them having to ask that, what happens is they see it. And that's the purpose of a standing ovation. So that's why I tell people, like, hey, it's not about your ego, nothing. I mean, of course, maybe it's ego boost. You're like, yeah, I'm the bomb. Yeah. But still, the purpose of the standing ovation is to show the meeting planner the actual response the audience has to you. So that's what you really have to think about. So let's see if there were any questions. If not, then we are good to go for today. Let's see, say, my name is Paul. I'm a compulsive gambler. Okay. All right. Let's see. Audio's good. Loves date examples and analogy. Yeah, the dating, the reason why I do the dating is because the dating, it is like a perfect example of how things actually work. Like I know a lot of people talk theory and all that, but dating it's a perfect analogy in terms of how things actually work. So let's see. You said, that is one thing we have in common. Always receive standing ovation. Nice. Say, I always tell my audience at the end of the presentation, I'm going to end with a very short story. Then I tell a story. It's always an emotional story. And thanks for listening. Yep. She said, maybe I'll try slam poetry at my next event, or at least something similar. I might be able to get away with it. Okay. Cool. All right. And then we got that. I'm going to let the mouse, what'd you say? Going to let the mouse loose on the floor. Thanks for listening. Awesome. All right. So, cool. So we are good to go for today. Ultimately that's really what it comes down to in terms of the best way to end a presentation. There is no best way. The best way, it just depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then you ultimately reverse engineer from there. If you want a standing ovation, if you're like delivering a motivational, presentation, you want a standing ovation, not usually. You want a standing ovation. If you're selling from the stage, you want people to go to the back of the room. If you're doing a webinar, sales video, you obviously want people to buy. And so what you're ultimately doing, the ending is very dependent on the beginning. It's dependent on everything that comes before that. If I were to do my routine with a standing ovation, that whole thing like that, but everything before that sucked, it doesn't matter what I do at the end. Like, it just wouldn't work. I could say like, thank you. There'd be nobody to point to. Thank you. I said thank you. And so it's like, if the presentation sucked, then nothing I do at the end would actually matter. So you have to remember that the beginning, the ending is dependent on the beginning. Very similar to a movie. The climax of the movie is very dependent on everything that happens before that moment in time, before that climax. So let's see. You said, if you are at a podium, just ask. Wait, what? Hold on. What did you say? How do you reference your book or materials at the end? Okay, so at the end, so remember how I say at the end, I'm like, all right, thanks everybody. I really appreciate being here. This is going to be the final thing I'm going to do. That's when I say what I need to say. So that's when I say like, thanks everybody. I'm going to actually be just standing over here. If you guys want to come up to me, hand me your business cards. If you guys have any, if you guys want to bring me in for a presentation, just hand me your business cards. We're going to be walking around, grabbing video testimonies of you guys, asking you what you thought. That's when I say the whole thing. I give like a little pitch in terms of what it is I'm doing. So that's when you do it. At the very end, right before you finish, that's when you say, hey guys, thank you. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you guys bringing me out. I've got a book. If you guys want a book, it only costs you $50,000 per copy. If you want me to sign it, it'll cost you $100,000. So that's when you do everything. Like when you're towards the end, that's when you say it. You say all that stuff you need to say. Then you do your final thing. This, once again, it's only if you're doing a motivational presentation. If you are selling from the stage, your entire presentation revolves around bringing up objections and crushing those objections and getting people to the back of the room. And hopefully you're selling more than a book. Hopefully you're selling like an expensive ass product. But just remember, that's the moment when you actually tell people about your book, tell them about getting testimonials, tell them to walk up to you, give them to give you their business card. That's the biggest thing, by the way. Have them give you their business card. It's not about you giving them the business card. It's about you getting their business card. So just remember that point as well. All right, so we are good to go for today. So I will see you guys tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Take care, everybody.